All right, there we go.
The yellow light.
Is there a yellow light?
Well, it
Good,
goes
we're
it says
live.
live. No, it's up right.
Oh, it says live. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. It is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up, broadcasting live from my deathbed. I am sick, and it is not fun. And I got sick on the day of my vacation, so all of my plans to play Halo 5 have been destroyed. And instead, I'm here with you people.
So I told my wife that you were sick on your vacation and it had ruined your plans to play Xbox. And her
Yeah.
comments were, "Since when do you need to be well to play Xbox?"
You have to concentrate. It takes all your faculties to
Well, that's
be...
what I said. I said that he couldn't even think. Like he was so feverish that he couldn't think, and she was just not convinced that you could be so sick, like at home, like not in hospital sick. You're so sick at home that you can't play Xbox. So, I mean, she doesn't have a particularly high regard for gaming in general, but I'm just saying.
No, I mean, I'm so sick I couldn't watch TV. You know what I'm saying? Like I was trying to like. Here's what happens: you watch a show,
Yeah,
and you
you
get
can't remember
a scene into it, and you're like, "What just happened?" And then you back up
it.
10 minutes, and you're like, "I mean, I'm losing time." You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what it feels like when you're like so feverish that it hurts to try and concentrate. Like if you even tried to play an Xbox game, you would just feel physically ill.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I just need to close my eyes and be in a dark room for the next 3 days.
Well,
I
I
had
just
that
have.
last week in combination with being jet lagged. Jet
Oh,
lagged and being
lovely.
sick is the worst.
This
Yeah.
is such a great way to open a show.
I appreciate. I think that what's the significant part here is that you've defended me to your wife,
I did. I attempted to anyway.
and
I'm
now
not sure how
now
successful.
apparently she and I are mortal enemies. So you can tell your wife how disappointed I am that she did not back me up. All right.
Yes,
So we're going to change things up a little bit because
because John hates us.
John
That's
is
true.
mad because John does his homework and then we don't actually ask him to turn it in. Last week, John had about a 90-minute presentation that he developed with some links, and I failed to do because I was probably the beginning of my sickness.
That's true.
Anyway, what we're going to do from now on is have the community stand up links first, assuming John's bandwidth holds up. Are you? Can we see you? Are you looking okay? Looks like
Should I? Well, I'm always looking okay. I don't know if you can
There
see
you
me.
go. All right, so let's
Yeah.
have the links there, John.
What's okay? So here we go. So this is Armin. He did a cool post. He's doing a series, and it's called ASP.NET 5 Web API Faking It While Making It. What I like about this post, he goes through and he explains some stuff, with Web API in general. But he also does some neat things with here. Just let me. Yep, I'm on the right settings. He also does some cool things where he explains deferring decisions. So he goes through and defers as many decisions as possible as he's building this out. So I like it's kind of an opinionated series. It's not just technically focused. ASP.NET MVC boilerplate from Rehen is updated for RC1. So that is a very cool template. It's got a lot of great stuff in there. Also, kind of an opinionated template here. Damien Bod, I don't know if that's his name. He always just posts as Damien Bod, so that's what I'm calling him. But he's got this OAuth 2 implicit flow with Angular and identity server. So this is a nice, very meaty post with lots of code. Very short, non-meaty post with just a little bit of important code, I think, is this typed headers with ASP.NET from Scott Allen. So that's I've talked to some people that complain that headers are untyped, and this is like just a couple lines code fix for that.
As
The
in,
healthcare.
rather than just to elaborate on that, it's
Yeah.
not that he's fixed anything. He just
No.
found the API that you have to call. Like there are typed headers. It's just that you opt into them rather than being that way by default.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. People just aren't aware of that. Healthcare.biz. Scott, this is your demo that you showed off at the Connect event. So this is a cool blog post explaining it, nice diagrams and everything, and then the code's up on GitHub. So very cool post from Erica about that. I really like that demo, by the way. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, and I would this is a good opportunity to point out, if you could switch back to that one, that I work on those demos, but I do not write them all by myself. I actually got a team that helps work on that kind of stuff, and Erica managed everything there. So while I came up with the ideas and stuff. We work as a team of 5 or 6, depending on how many people are involved, and they bust their butts on this stuff. And there were 8 different projects that were created for this demo. So just cannot say enough nice things about Erica and the team that helped work on that stuff.
Cool. Okay. Here's something on GitHub. There's no post or anything, but it's just a typed routing package from Yellow Kenov. So this gives you typed routing information. You can work with routes as strongly typed. Here's a video series from Steve Woods. Let's build an ASP.NET MVC to-do list. And it's just kind of conversational. He just kind of like, yeah, now I'm going to try this and stuff, but it's kind of a fun series. I like it. So here's one from Khalid, and he ran into an issue with tag helpers, and then at the bottom, Damien, you helped him solve it. It was that there was encoding was stripping out his new line.
That's not a solution. That is a hack. And It's funny you brought this up because it's actually on my list of things to talk about.
Is that cool. Good or bad?
And last,
we'll find out.
Good or bad. Oh. Okay. All right, and then last thing on the list, this is a post from Jennifer Wright, and actually she's linking to a video from Ugo Lazzani, and it's just what's new in MVC 6. So a nice kind of video overview. So that's it for me.
Cool. You don't have to rush.
I feel like I do.
You've got all the time in the world, John.
All the time in the world.
All right.
All right. Good stuff. Thank you for assembling those. We appreciate it. All right. Let's see if we have any questions.
I've got some updates I can talk through first.
Okay. We have no questions yet, which may be the first time that's ever happened.
This is good. So I've been doing some. So first of all, we have, in order to, let me start it again. That was terrible. As part of our preparation for obviously shipping an RC2 in February and then an RTW a month or so after that. We are instigating an API freeze come the end of this month, and so the intent is that at the end of December, APIs will be frozen, and they won't change between then and RC2. Yeah, that's a plan more than a promise, but it's a good plan, and as a result, we're doing our final sweeps through various parts of the API right now, just to ensure that any changes that have to be made as a result of the move to the .NET CLI. And or due to performance or due to feature gaps like the one that John just brought up, which I'll talk about in a minute, can be made now, so we've got a suitable amount of time to bed them down before we have to lock and verify for RC2, because we want an extremely high quality RC2 release. Super important for us. Related to that is that I'm doing a bunch of work in the loc at the moment. We had some feedback on a number of through a number of channels. That people were less than impressed with the localization stuff. I think most of that boiled down to there were some annoying bugs or known issues that we didn't have a chance to address that were causing making it very difficult to really get up and going with the loc APIs and really discover how they work. And so that was very much detrimental to people's first experience with them. Secondly, we have no docs on the localization stuff right now, so there's really nothing that people can read in order to learn about it. And there are no sizable samples as well. So it was like a terrible trifecta of just making it very difficult for people to approach that. So I went through and did an exercise of localizing the starter web template using the new APIs, and as a result of doing that, I found a bunch of usability issues and some performance issues. So we've fixed a couple of those. I'm working through fixing some more of those. If people are interested, they can track the work on the localization repo. I did a big one last night that I think improves usability a lot, and so that'll hopefully all finalize, like I said, in the next couple of weeks to make it in time for the API freeze. On the docs front, we continue to work through updating our docs. We also are working through getting our API reference docs. So we have multiple types of docs. We have like tutorials that are kind of follow the bouncing ball, introduction to a topic or a particular scenario. We have more reference documentation that'll cover an entire topic, and you could think of it more like a book. where I want to go and learn about tag helpers, and you want to have like a very thorough reference manual for how to do and work with tag helpers. And then you have standard API reference docs, like the traditional MSDN. I hit F1 in Visual Studio, and I get taken to a page about the specific method or class or property that I'm on. We haven't had the API ref docs up and running yet. We have a couple of people working on that right now, and we hope to have those up and running very, very soon, so that we'll have API ref docs on the doc site next to the more article or reference-based docs. We're working on a document specifically for people who have to host ASP.NET, so web hosting companies. And we released a doc about 5 years ago, which was a comprehensive hosting guide for ASP.NET. Obviously, a lot's changed in that time, so we're working hard to rejuvenate that doc and update it for ASP.NET 5 and the changes in IIS in that time and all that type of thing. So look for that to come out before RC2. The tag helper thing that John alluded to was, it turns out there was an oversight. There was basically one part of the tag helper pipeline, or indeed the Razor pipeline, that tag helper authors weren't able to control the encoding of. Now let me just preface this with, encoding is really, really hard, and getting it right is really, really difficult, and it's so easy to get it wrong. And so while I gave that gentleman a workaround, it was less than ideal. I actually gave him 2 workarounds. One involved having the user of the tag helper have to wrap the content in HTML.raw or new HTML string before they passed it in via the content of the tag. And the other one, I mean, that one will work all the time. It's just obviously not very nice for the tag helper user to have to know that. And then the other one was that the tag helper author could HTML decode the content before they work with it. Now that is never the right thing to do, because you have no idea what parts were previously encoded and what weren't, and which parts weren't, because it's a combination of dynamic content and literal content, and literal content does not get encoded because it's HTML, and dynamic content does get encoded because that's one of the features of Razor, is that all expressions are automatically HTML encoded for your safety, and if you don't want it to be encoded, you have to make sure the expression returns an HTML string. That becomes problematic with something like tag helpers, where you want the tag helper author to be able to use the HTML syntax to get as much control as possible. And we had ensured that was true on the way out. So when the tag helper author was emitting HTML, they have full control of the encoding. But when they're reading HTML from the source document, they had no control. And worse than that, the API gave them the illusion that they did have control. And so it was, a really big troll there. It's like, oh yeah, call this API and give us an encoder, and then we wouldn't use it. And so we're making an API change that will allow a tag helper author to get to the child content of a tag that they're working on and specify the encoding that they want to run there. And indeed, if they just pass null, they can get no encoding. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. I encourage tag helper authors to be very careful with that type of feature, because one of the promises of Razor is generally things are encoded, but there are use cases like something like a markdown tag helper where you do want to get to the raw content, and so even if it's passed through via an expression, that is via a Razor, a variable or something. So we're making that change. That'll land in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. The other big API review going on right now is with our hosting APIs. These are the low-level APIs that you would generally use inside your static void main, and then that boots your ASP.NET application in the new world. We're making some tweaks to that API to make it a lot more friendly. It's not particularly nice to use right now, and depending on what type of environment you're running in, you may need to configure that host a little more closely. As an example, if you look at the benchmarks repo, which we've talked about a lot, I'm getting terrible echo here. I don't know where it's coming from. Someone's mic is like feeding myself back to me, but that's whatever. If you look at the benchmarks repo, oh, it went away. If you go to the benchmarks repo, the app in the benchmarks repo now is interactive in the console while also booting the application in the background. And so to be able to do that, you need to be able to have full control over booting up the application, hooking key events in the console, echoing out information into the console, responding to shutdown in a graceful manner in the console so you can shut down the server, wait for it to drain requests before you then exit the application. All that code is in there. It's not particularly nice. And so we're cleaning up the APIs that you use to do all that so that that type of hosting environment becomes a much more straightforward and not as sort of yucky, I guess. So those are the big things that happened in the last week. Plus, of course, a lot of work continuing on the .NET CLI. We're working very closely in conjunction with the .NET team on the .NET CLI, and so a number of the people on the ASP.NET team are busy working on the .NET CLI stuff specifically, and that stuff will start to really come together in the next month, I believe. So let's go to questions.
Cool. I muted both of us. That's why I don't know where the echo is coming from, but John and I will turn our mics on and off.
Was it me?
I think it's you, John.
But he switched his headphones on. It's probably me. Anyway.
Okay.
Is there an estimation of when VS will support referencing project JSON from classic CS Proj?
Yeah, that's part of the work for the .NET CLI. So when our RC2 ships in mid to late February, that is one of the features that will be enabled. We need to have very good support for referencing XProj from CS Proj and also CS Proj from XProj. They just need to be seamless.
Okay, so just to make sure, when you say XProj, that is what we are saying when we're talking about ASP.NET 5.
So XProj is the VS project system that sits on top of the .NET CLI-based stuff. Previously, that was the DNX based stuff, so now that's .NET CLI. So XProj is effectively a .NET CLI app, not an MS Build based app. Whereas CS Proj is, obviously MS Build based. We need to make sure you can reference both ways.
Gotcha. Can we create some kind of gulp task, special gulp task that runs to clean up what is published without messing up development environment? Is there a clean? Is there a formal kind of clean?
There are a number of cleans. Most people end up using something like rimraf to do deep cleans. The rimraf task. I think our templates use the rimraf task because it's a good way of doing very deep cleans, even on Windows when you have one path.
Could you spell that? Because for maybe a
RIMRAF. It's just a library.
It comes from the Unix rm-rf.
Yeah. But there is a clean task. You can look around. There are plenty of examples of how to do cleaning up of folders or files using gulp.
Okay. Have all the bugs been fixed related to resolving correct packages like system.net.security? I still get errors when publishing a simple web API on Windows and deployed to Linux, not on Azure, in Docker.
So as part of RC1, we did that update because we had some issues with cross-platform publishing. My understanding is those are fixed. So if you're still having issues around that, you should log an issue with the details there so we can reproduce it up on the DNX repo, because I'm not aware of any issues there.
All right. Is there a way to list? What is this here? Is there a way to list other non-project folders in the solution in VS? I mean,
you just add a solution folder. So
if a folder's there, it's just there.
No, not in the solution. It's not. So the solution is a little wonky. Like solutions in Visual Studio.
Solution.
Okay. Solution folders aren't real folders. So when you add a solution folder in VS, it doesn't actually create a folder on disk. But if you add a solution folder that happens to have the same name as a folder that's already on the disk, it will just map to that folder on disk. But you still need to specifically add items, like files, into that folder from the solutions point of view in order for them to be seen in Visual Studio. So it's a little manual. It doesn't work like XProj.
Yep. Is there a plan to support or boost the Web API Swagger Swashbuckle test client? This individual says it's a little lacking at the moment.
I have absolutely no context in that.
You could probably ask Brady Gaster, but I think it'd probably be better to ask Brady, but he's the person who talks to the Swashbuckle team, which is an open source project. So if you feel it's lacking, you should get involved with the Swashbuckle team. I think that would be a fair statement, would you not?
That sounds so. I mean, I'm not sure of the particulars of what the test client is. I don't know if that's
it's the auto generation of the text boxes over whatever web API you have, so that you might go and do it. Right? And he's saying that it is lacking in his opinion.
Sure. Okay.
The Swashbuckle team is one dude, by the way, and Brady helping out when possible. So.
I know. There's lots of open source projects that are just one individual, and I just like to make sure I call them a team.
Okay.
Out of an overdeveloped sense of respect.
Yeah, we're more than happy to complain about one person teams. That's fine.
Yeah. Same for the team that runs my blog, right?
That's right. Work harder.
Yeah. Asking for a friend. Can you explain the differences between MS Build and the DNX.NET CLI? Maybe about the responsibilities?
So the MS Build is a build engine. It's an orchestration engine. It's whereas the .NET CLI is a very focused command line experience for authoring and compiling .NET applications. It is not a build system. You do not. It's not like Make, right? MS Build is equivalent to something like Make, or Rake, or Sake, or pick your favorite build engine, Nant, etc., etc. The .NET CLI is much more akin to what we call a command line driver, whereby it's a very focused command line experience. Like we intend it to be used by humans, whereas something like CSC, like the command line compiler for C#, is not really intended to be. It's not first designed to be used by humans primarily. It's designed to be called by something like an MS Build task. Whereas the .NET CLI is designed to be used by people. And so, but its responsibilities stop once it's produced a .NET application, a binary or an exe, and being able to pull in dependencies by NuGet or by project references, what we call P2P references or project-to-project references. And that's it. It doesn't do complex build orchestration. You're not going to use it to build something beyond the scope of a single .NET application. Whereas MS Build, obviously, you can build huge things. So Scott has run away. So let me see if I can read through the rest of these questions. Is there an intent to move to intent to move? I guess that means to NPM3. Yes, we should definitely move to NPM3 in terms of what we ship with Visual Studio in the near future. I'm not sure if that's on the plans for the next Visual Studio update, but I would hope so. In the meantime, of course, you're free to update your version of Node to version 5 or above, which I believe includes NPM3, and then you can tweak Visual Studio to use your path to get those tools instead of using what we shipped in Visual Studio, and that should all just work for you. Will there be support for T4 templates in Xproj? I'm not going to say never, but I am going to say not for RTM. It
is fair to say, though, isn't it, that like internally T4 is kind of like chilling.
Yeah, I mean T4 is used by our template system still, but that doesn't mean it's getting a lot of active development.
Yeah.
And we still don't have an editor for T4 in Visual Studio. So T4 is what it is. I know some people have been porting T4 to .NET Core. In fact, one of the developers on the EF team did some work to port T4 to .NET Core. So I wouldn't say that it's done just yet. I think if there is a desire to have it run in more places and kind of being brought forward, then it'll happen. That's the new open source world. So.
It's definitely worth pointing out that there was a time when T4 was at the height of technology and that we were all doing amazing new stuff with it. Just because it's not actively being worked on doesn't mean it's not useful and being used. It just means that it is kind of quieted a little bit. I'd like to see support for it.
Yeah, absolutely. It just comes down to priorities at that point.
Is hosting ASP.NET 5 web apps in an Azure web app a recommended approach, or do you recommend it in a VM or a Docker container?
It's up to you. Obviously, deploying to a web app in Azure is one of our first-class, super supported scenarios. So we try and make sure that works really, really, really well. So absolutely do that if the features of web apps are appealing to you. So this isn't a question about what's better for this technology, ASP.NET 5. Ignore that part. You need to assess the web apps technology, you need to assess Docker, you need to assess VMs, and choose which one of those hosting technologies is better for your requirements, as opposed to trying to say this is better for ASP.NET 5. We need ASP.NET 5 to be great in all those environments.
Yeah, you should definitely, and also, this is a tough thing to say, but know why you're choosing a hosting model. And Absolutely. It's totally fine, depending on the size of your project and what you're accomplishing, to right-click publish from Visual Studio. The majority of things that are going on in Azure are right-click publish into VS. You can get deploy to Azure. You don't need to necessarily get all Dockery and containery if it's a little early for you.
Yeah, and
no need to be fancy.
The reality is the majority of our customers from our data do publish directly from Visual Studio to at least one environment, if not production.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it.
Is there going to be any guidance on Azure Cloud Service web roles with the new MVC? Have we looked at kind of classic cloud service under Azure and doing this stuff?
I don't have a good answer for that. My understanding is
Should just work.
it doesn't just work. You would have to create a deployment package that installs the newer version of .NET.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is it would boot up, like if you look at the Docker file, like the way you get DNVM and then you go and you get the CLR, if you did the same kind of package.
Well, I mean, let's face it, in a web role, in a cloud service app, you can pretty much make it install anything you like. The question is, like, how easy is that?
Maybe John, in his copious spare time, could find a community link.
Maybe.
That someone has solved that already.
Yeah, so I think that where it gets a little, there's a seam there is when people expect web role, or people's exposure to web role is kind of what's in Visual Studio. So you say like, a new web role project, that won't be ASP.NET 5 for quite some time. Right? That is a templated first-class experience. That is based on the old project system, or the existing one, the web application project system, which doesn't support ASP.NET 5. We have a new project system, Xproj, as I said before, which is not integrated in with that entire VS Azure web role experience. So you can certainly do it manually, but there's no sort of file new ASP.NET 5 web role.
Cool. We do not have an easy way to get sensitive files like dumps and traces to team members when troubleshooting issues.
Mm-hmm.
So
do you think anything can be done to put sensitive?
So what we do is if they're in Azure, I dump them into storage, in Azure Storage, and then I give the secondary key to a team member, and I have them pull it off of Azure Storage.
Yeah, I mean, that question is the answer to that very much premises on what your environment is. If you're in Azure Web Apps, then files, you can configure them to drop to file storage or to go into the web application temp folder, and then you can run a web job or do whatever you like. It's Azure to put them wherever you like. If it's a different environment, then that's really going to come down to what mechanisms you have available in that environment. So there's really no single answer for that. I think it really comes down to what you have available to you. I mean, I've run behind the firewall before with multiple web servers, and the IS logs, NAP logs would ship down or write to a local disk for performance, and then there would be a background task that collects those logs and dump files from all the web nodes and puts them into a central sort of diagnostics area as a background job. But that was all very custom. Or you could use a system like a System Center Operations Manager or whatever the current equivalent of that is to do that with Windows servers. And I'm sure in the Linux world you do different things. A lot of people.
And there's also Application Insights or Raygun or any of another half dozen or exception lists. There's lots of different systems by which they will capture those things and shuttle them off somewhere else.
Yeah, certainly if it's just traces and exceptions, there's 101 different ways of doing that. When you get to things like dump files, that's obviously a little more. There's not as much you can do. Like if you've set up the system to automatically collect process dumps when a process crashes, they'll generally just go onto that box. Unless you've configured it specifically to drop to a network share or something. But again, that's all very custom. Like, there's really no general solution for that I'd be recommending.
Has Kestrel hit 1 million requests per second?
Not on my machine. So certainly Azure VMs, the Stack Overflow web tier that Nick Craver has been doing some testing on, they've easily cleared 1 million. They've got up to 1.5 million on those machines. They're a lot more powerful than the rig I have here, but my rig is over 800,000 now, and we still have some changes in flight that I expect will hit 1 million early in the new year. My plan is for us my hope is that we'll hit 1 million before we ship RTM.
And they want you to buy the domain haskestrel.hit1millionrps.com.
That someone should just
make it say no, and then it'll
just make it say no, and then when I tweet, someone can make it say yes.
That's lovely. All right, cool. What are we using to generate documentation for XML docs? We're using read the docs and some
no, it's not that simple.
Not for XML.
No, we're not. So
the
for
XML, I thought we had a Sphinx thing that was added by.
We have. It's a multi-step process. So we use a combination of an internal tool that was developed by the MSDN team that then also works with a Sphinx plugin to then generate the ref docs. Because we're talking about the reference docs, not about the docs that we have the article sort of docs.
Then I must be out of touch. The reason is that because when I was working with Read the Docs and Dan Roth maybe 6 months ago, we sucked it out with a Roslyn tool.
Yeah, that tool was built by the MSDN team.
Oh, okay.
Is my understanding. So there was something built internally that can read the docs out of the code using Roslyn, and then there's the other part, which is a Sphinx plugin to take that data and turn it into a website. What do we got next?
So many questions, they won't stop. Is SignalR compatible? What is the future direction for SignalR?
So, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but I'll say it again. SignalR will not release RTM at the same time as the rest of ASP.NET 5. We're going to make sure the repo continues to build, because we know people obviously are using SignalR 3 in their ASP.NET 5 applications. It stopped compiling a few weeks ago because we made some breaking changes, so we've got a developer who's going to fix it up for us this week. But it will not be releasing at RTM in March. It'll release at some point after that. It has a future. The future direction, there's lots of ideas and lots of things that we want to do in SignalR. We're just too busy doing ASP.NET 5 right now. That said, we are doing a servicing release for SignalR this month. So for those customers who are on SignalR 2, we are doing a release of the C++ client, the C# client, adding support for UWP apps, adding support for default WebSockets in Windows Phone 8 and Windows Store 8 apps, and some servicing 10 or 15 bugs being fixed on the server as well, as part of a SignalR servicing release. So look for that to ship in the next week or so.
When targeting DNX 451 or 46, are they still dependent on system.web?
No.
So the unused libraries don't get loaded into memory. They're just not even brought up.
Yep, no, not used at all. System web is not used unless for some reason you reference it.
Nice. This is a great one. I really like this. I remember when David wrote that little document about it. How do you tell the .NET CLI what the entry point of your application is for source and published apps?
So there is a compilation setting that you can set in your project JSON file currently under compilation options that basically says, please omit an entry point. By default, that's convention-based, and it looks for a method called static void main on any type in your project. If you want to get more granular than that, and you want to be able to actually specify a different entry point, I'm not really sure. There's been talk about it. I'm not really sure of the latest details of that. That was in DNX, we had a feature called commands that let you specify an alternate entry point for when you ran DNX, command name. You could point it to a method in a different assembly. That's not generally how .NET hosting works. That was a feature that we added in DNX. That feature will not exist in the .NET CLI as it currently stands. We will not have that similar commanding feature. It actually causes a whole bunch of problems when it comes to working with things that expect .NET to work a certain way. So we're going back to the more traditional, I have a static void main in my application, and that is what gets called by the runtime when my application starts. And from there, you can call whatever you like. So people who are looking for more traditional self-host should be happy, because that's pretty much how it's going to work now.
Now that the API is sort of finalized, will we expect a big push on docs? MVC is largely undocumented. I can't find comprehensive documentation on routing even for older ASP.NET versions.
So, not really, because the people who write the docs aren't the people who are doing the engineering work. So it's not like because people aren't building features, we suddenly have more people to write docs. And it's also not the case that we were churning so much that we were holding off on writing docs. We have a bunch of people working on docs now from our technical writing team. I think it's 3 or 4 at the last count, plus we have an external vendor who we're working with to help with docs, and we have community contributions. So we're working very hard on docs. Docs just take a long time to write. That's all I can say, is that docs take a long time to write. You want to pick one article out of the tree of, the table of contents is currently there, where we've filled out the table of contents, but obviously only there's a little wrench icon next to each document that hasn't actually been completed yet. Each one of those can take multiple weeks to complete, and so even with 4 or 5 people working on it, It takes a very long time to flesh those docs out. We're also working to improve the navigation model. There's some navigation and usability issues with the doc site right now that we're trying to address. Things like the MVC docs are really hard to find because they live under a frameworks node, and then if you click on MVC, you can't get back to the parent node, and you can't search for MVC from the root of the doc site. There's a whole bunch of issues like that that we're trying to fix that will hopefully make it easier to find docs that are there. And we're also trying to figure out if we can do like a what's new page so that people can see what the newest added documents are rather than having to go all the way to the GitHub repo and like look at the commits to understand what's new. So there's a whole bunch of things we're working on there. None of this is going to happen quickly. I'm not saying it's going to happen this month. I mean, look for these things to happen as we move towards RC2 in mid to late February. But docs are just expensive. They take a long time to get right. What's a good next one?
Why don't you pick one? I'm getting overwhelmed, and I'm getting also a little lightheaded.
Okay, well, we don't want you to like collapse on the camera.
I won't collapse. You'll just won't see me moving anymore.
Someone asked how to integrate. Is it here?
ASP.NET 5 with Active Directory and an intranet.
So if you're using full framework, I mean that question can be interpreted a bunch of different ways. So let me try and interpret it at least 3 ways, and hopefully one of these answers is correct. If you just mean how do I authenticate using Windows Authentication against an Active Directory, like a domain, then you host on IIS using the HTTP Platform Handler, you enable the Windows Auth pass-through feature, which is turned on by default, I think, in our templates, and then that will pass through the Windows Auth handle into ASP.NET 5, whether you're running .NET Core or full framework, and you will be authenticated using Windows Auth. If you actually mean how do I do something like query the Active Directory using directory services or LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, on full framework you can just use the existing namespaces for doing that. I think it's system.directory services. If you're on .NET Core, there isn't an LDAP client for .NET Core as I understand it right now. You should by all means go and log an issue or comment on an issue on the .NET Core FX repo if that is an important aspect for you. Those are the 2 ways that I can interpret that question. So auth versus querying the directory.
You mentioned last week that commands in project.json are going away.
Yep.
XUnit uses a command to discover tests. How would that work in the future?
Yep. So XUnit doesn't really use a command to discover tests. XUnit launched as your app by being the entry point for your app, and then as in your app being the test app, and then when XUnit's running, all the tests that you have are there because it's the part of the same logical context. We executed XUnit as the entry point. It's done in the context of running your app, and so all the unit tests are very easy to discover. They're just loaded in the application. In the new model, there are APIs that libraries like XUnit can use in order to load your test application, the application that contains your unit tests, and then query and discover tests inside the application. So in the new model, XUnit is a command or a tool that you bring into your application by way of a tooling dependency, which is a new feature. So you would declare in your project JSON that you depend on the XUnit runner for .NET CLI. It gets brought in via NuGet as a tool, and then the .NET driver, the .NET command line, will let you, say .NET XUnit or something equivalent, and then that will execute XUnit, and then XUnit will load and be able to discover your application by way of this new API, and then it'll work just like it did previously. This is all just mechanics. So really, you'll be able to achieve the same things, like the user secrets global tool that we released, the DNX watch global tool, the EF migrations commands, the scaffolding commands in Visual Studio, and the XUnit test runner. These all worked using the DNX commands mechanism. They will all work now using this new mechanism in the .NET CLI. So even though we're taking away DNX commands, we're replacing it with a new system that we think is superior and is not as quirky as the commanding system was.
What's the default logging implementation going to be? Do you plan on having one built in for use in Azure? From what I understand, you need to build a custom logger using Serialog at the moment to get logging in Azure.
I don't know about that, actually.
I thought we just Okay. I mean, I know in classic ASP.NET, or classic, it's not fair to say, ASP.NET 4.6, the Azure adds in a trace listener, does it not, at runtime?
Yep. And so you can redirect the iLogger. You can add a logger provider that uses tracing, that uses the System Diagnostics Trace APIs. We ship that. That's part of what we ship, so you can use that. You can obviously log directly to the console and then configure the IIS HTTP platform handler to capture standard out from your process and write that to a file in your web application, even in Azure, and then you could obviously download that and do that. Or you could write your own logger provider that logs directly to something else. I agree that some people may think that none of those options are optimal, and we need to have a look at a better way of doing that. Now, I will say that even with what we have in Azure today, it only auto-captured trace events for those that were written to the global trace source, which is only those that use the static trace.writeline or trace information sort of methods. If you had any type of categorized tracing where you used a trace source and a trace switch, which realistically anything that was worth its salt did, anything in the .NET framework did that, you didn't get that stuff via the sort of the global Azure trace capture trick that they did. You have to still configure it to write to a file generally, drop that file either in blob storage or on the hard drive, and then pick it up and put it somewhere that makes sense to you. Or you, like you said before, use something like Application Insights and trace events to Application Insights when they're interesting. I understand that those type of events are generally different to low-level tracing, where you want to do very fine-grained telemetry so you can diagnose issues. But those are different concerns, and you generally use different mechanisms for getting that data. So.
Cool. This is how bad we are now. Christian is saying everyone who doesn't get their question answered should join us on Jabber.
We can't scale anymore.
Kind of mean. Yeah, Jabber, JABBR.net is a ASP.NET based chat room that you all can apparently talk badly about us when we don't answer your questions.
No. I think Christian's being nice. If you go into the ASP.NET vNext room on there, Fowler is usually in that room, and a bunch of our other very prominent community members are in that room, and they're more than willing and able to answer most of these questions. So.
I know he knows I'm playing.
I know. I just want to make the rest of the people
know. Can we have some? I'm not sure. I always feel. Okay. Can we have some new command window from which we can manually run npm and npm tools in VS? So, Vladislav, there's a really great. He wants to have another command window. He can run the tools from VS. So I mean, you can run them from Package Console. It's kind of PowerShell-y.
It is PowerShell.
What I like to do is there's the Quake Mode stuff that.
Funny move.
No. Here we go. I'll share my screen.
Commander?
No.
How many different things are you using?
I use a lot of things. Here, tell me when you can see this. So This was Phil Hack. I told Phil Hack I wanted Quake Mode for GitHub for Windows. One of the great tips in GitHub for Windows is hitting the what's it called? The tilde key. So Mads Christensen, who is incapable of solving any problem without making a Visual Studio plugin, I mentioned it to him.
Yeah.
And then apparently over lunch he made Quake Mode for Visual Studio. So he makes it so you hit Alt space, and it drops you into a Visual Studio prompt in the folder of the currently selected project.
Yeah, open command prompt here.
So,
basically.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, Vladislav, but it's just not appropriate for us to build a full command prompt inside of Visual Studio when there is a command prompt.
Well,
I think the real question is, can I open one faster and get to where
I don't necessarily agree with you, Scott. Like, we've talked about this before. There is a very strong desire from many angles to get an integrated shell into Visual Studio, an integrated command prompt.
Okay, for why?
Well, because we have a bunch of different ones already. We have a REPL. We have an output window that's pluggable but is non-interactive and doesn't support console coloring. We have the Task Runner Explorer now that is also not interactive but does support console coloring. And then we have the NuGet Package Manager window, which is PowerShell but doesn't use your default PowerShell profile. So we have this quasi situation where we have various console-like things in Visual Studio, but none of them actually deliver what a lot of people want, which is when I control F5, my console app in Visual Studio, I want it to open a console pane in Visual Studio that I can dock in VS like everything else and launch my console app from there, as opposed to what happens now, which is it just launches command.exe effectively, which isn't PowerShell, which doesn't use your profile in the same way that the PowerShell window does. And for example, the font might be really small compared to what you have set up in your normal console, and so it looks really weird on new high DPI displays, which is one thing that irks me. And now that ASP.NET 5 are console apps by default, if you choose not to host with IS Express in Visual Studio, if you drop the little thing down and say, I want to run just using the web command directly, guess what you get? All it does is launch a command window and says your application has started, and then that's it. It doesn't launch a browser by default. You can't type into that command by default. If you are in code in Visual Studio debugging, you can't see the lovely trace messages that we spit out to the command console by default with coloring, because that's in the console window, not in Visual Studio. So it's not quite as integrated as I think it could be, and I think that's something that we should explore, but we don't have any firm plans. So.
All right, you make a good case. What's the recommended approach for protecting a web API? Is Identity Server recommended currently?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm looking for other yes/no questions. I'm building a managed libgd wrapper at the moment. I don't like the fact that in Linux the native library has to be manually copied to the lib folder. Is there plans to make native libraries work from the package as it does in Windows?
They do. It does work. So if you want to ship the native library...
Wasn't there NuGet work that needed to be done for that? This was an argument that Nathaniel Jones was talking about for a long time.
My understanding is we've done it. So that's how Kestrel works. Kestrel ships libuv for Windows and Mac inside the NuGet package. We didn't do it for Linux as a design choice, not because it can't be done.
Okay, so Sharif, ask Jeff Fritz, C# Fritz on Twitter, and CC me, and we'll get that figured out.
Yeah. And I'm talking specifically about when you're using it with ASP.NET 5. I'm not sure if there's wider work required to make it work better in other project types.
Sure. Is there any perf decrease running an app with source versus compiling it?
Startup perf. Just startup perf.
Once it's up and warm, it's cool in the gang.
Assuming that you've run it from source and done passed in the release configuration. Remember that when you compile and debug versus release, release has a whole lot more optimizations that are made by the compiler. And generally when you compile for a package, you'll specify the release. So you'll want to make sure you pass in -- configuration space release when you run your app using DNX to get those optimizations.
Okay, cool. I like the simple answers. Follow-up question on logging. Where can I find samples of how logging for Azure using the approaches you suggested? For ASP.NET 5, I mean, this is the thing. We don't have a lot of docs right now.
We have some, but some of these end-to-end scenarios, like how to set up logging with ASP.NET 5 and Azure Web Apps, yeah, we don't have those articles yet. So in terms of ASP.NET 5, we have articles like that for ASP.NET 4 and 4X, but not for ASP.NET 5. You can look in the logging repo to see samples of how to configure the logging system to go to different places, and then you can try those, publish your app to Azure, and through trial and error, figure out what works best for you. But we haven't done the full end-to-end on that yet to document a recommended approach.
All right. Is requesting a client certificate available?
I think we added client cert support to Kestrel just recently. I even think it was a community pull request, maybe. And I'm not sure about when you're running behind IIS using the HTTP platform handler. I'm not sure if we have support for passing through client cert handles yet. I think the answer is no. But we would need more details exactly on the scenario they're looking to support. By all means, if you need that, please log an issue in the appropriate repo with all the details so that we can prioritize that and give you a solid answer.
Earlier, an individual was saying about sensitive files and dumps, and I think we took it the wrong way. They were saying, can you, meaning us, set up something to get sensitive files to the .NET team for .NET GitHub issues? What do you recommend? Some of your folks are a bit stuck and they don't know what to suggest to us. Luke, why don't you tweet me or email me? There's like official rules as far as like PII and personally identifiable information and stuff, and then there's the just get her done. I send dumps via Dropbox to people all the time.
Yep.
So I can't prevent you from Dropboxing something to us. Certainly use your appropriate judgment at your company around personally identifiable information. But if something is crashing on your personal machine and you're not going to give away anything sensitive, you have to ask me, like, how sensitive is sensitive? If they're wondering a way to do that, there's all sorts of encryption technologies. But email me or CC me on whatever question's going on. This is not this is not a hard problem to solve.
The challenge there is the key exchange, the secret exchange. Now that we're open source and all these issues are being discussed in the public, like if you want private support, you pay Microsoft. That is the short, very curt answer. If you want to be able to if you want to be able to publicly discuss an issue on open source code and then provide us private sensitive files to help in the debugging of those issues, there isn't really a fantastic way of doing that unless you're happy to publicly share your email address. I mean, you can always use something like Twitter direct messages and just say in the GitHub issue, hey, follow me on Twitter, this is my handle, if you have a Twitter account, and then I'll DM you a OneDrive link or the password to a zip file that I have up on this OneDrive link, and so you can just make it more obscure. But the challenge in public exchange is always going to be, how do we exchange the secrets? Like if you don't have a channel over which you can exchange the secret.
I use keybase.io.
Yeah, then how do you share the URL or the key that the other person needs to enter into?
I send it as a message in Keybase.
Right, but that requires both parties to sign into Keybase.
Right, which
Sure.
Keybase is the new hotness. It's Twitter for PGP. Everyone should use it.
May well be. I'm just saying that I wouldn't expect that every open source project, and even those at Microsoft, you can just easily say, yeah, I'm going to share this with you with Keybase. Why don't you have a Keybase account? We have people on the team who don't have Twitter accounts. So
I hear what you're saying. The point is, you have to come together again on something.
Of course you do. Of course you do. This is a tricky problem.
Up and come together.
This is a tricky problem.
Okay. What happened to your beard?
Hey, fell off.
I'll try and answer mine. There was Movember, and Movember ended, and then I gave a shot at December, and my wife shut me down. That's my short answer. I don't know what happened to Scott's beard.
Mine was I got sick, and being sick with a beard is gross.
All right.
It really is. All right, we got to wrap this up. I got to go to the doctor.
Okay.
Hey, can I share one? Can I share one more thing that I forgot that I totally should not have forgot because it's important, which is the Channel 9 sessions are up from MS
From the summit.
From the summit, yeah. So if you go on the Channel 9 ASP.NET Fall Sessions is what you search for. This is all 3 days minus like one or two things where, I don't know, somebody said something they shouldn't or whatever. But or whatever. There were like some very, very minor NDA things, but like 99% of the whole week is up here, which is really cool. So the Channel 9 team was awesome in editing these and loaning us pro gear and everything, so that's cool.
They are very candid discussions too. So if you want to, I mean, these aren't, I would say that when we're talking in these talks, we tend not to talk in the same way that we would when we get up in front of an audience at TechEd or NDC or pick your favorite conference. So take that with a grain of salt. There's a lot of to and fro with the audience. There's a lot of respect in the room, but we also challenge each other a lot. And sometimes we might say things that come off a little harsh, and that's because of the context of the room that we're in. So I hope so. That's how I see it anyway. Or maybe we're just being, we're being assholes. I don't realize it.
Hey, something's going on Twitter here. Guys asking about WCF. You couldn't write a WCF app on Linux because we never open sourced the server side, and it's all system.web, right?
Unless Mono re-implemented. Well, it's not system.web. It's system.service model. But
system.service model. Yeah.
Yeah, Mono may have re-implemented WCF on the server. I'd be surprised if they hadn't. But that would be Mono.
All right, let's bang these out. Razor minification.
Yep, no, that's an ongoing, recurring topic. There's a bunch of community members working through that right now that are keeping that issue alive. We have no plans to put anything in the box for 1.0, but we have been sort of helping guide the community in where they should, right, with this, change this line, in order to get them going.
MVC identity with an existing custom user database and custom hashed passwords. I see this is a great example. I know how to do this in classic ASP.NET with a HTTP module and build all the auth. Now it's middleware, right?
Well, so it depends. No. It all depends. So, are they asking whether they want to plug in an identity provider, or do they just want to do auth? If you just want to do auth, then yeah, you would use write your own auth middleware, which I can't believe I'm saying because oh my god, please don't write your own auth middleware. But if you want to do custom auth, of course you can just write your own auth middleware. If you want to plug into ASP.NET Identity and our security middleware that does auth, then it's a completely provider-based model, and you can back it with a custom schema just by plugging in a number of different interfaces. So.
All right. What's the status of Web API with regards to OData in ASP.NET 5?
Plead the fifth. I have no idea about OData.
Ask Dan Roth. Is he thinking about OData at all anymore?
I don't think we have an OData story in 1.0.
Okay. Follow up to the .NET CLI question. How does .NET know how to execute, ASP.NET hosting program main?
It doesn't.
Because it doesn't. You have to tell
it. That's what I'm saying. You have a program main in your app now. It's much more. It's just like a normal .NET Console app, and in your program main, you call the entry point of the ASP.NET Hosting API. So your ASP.NET 5 application doesn't actually start being an ASP.NET application until you call the ASP.NET Hosting API yourself. Now it's like 1 or 2 lines of code. It's very simple, but the reality is you're now completely self-hosted. Your static void main is the entry point. That was not the case in the DNX world.
All right. System.serviceModel.syndication support in .NET Core needed for RSS and Atom feeds. No, there is no system.serviceModel, but yes, there's lots of ways to make RSS and Atom feeds. I was able to make an RSS feed in Razor. You can look at my GitHub repository. It's 12 lines of code. All my podcast sites, including Hansel Minutes, run on ASP.NET web pages. So you can generate an RSS feed in Razor in minutes.
Cool.
That was Mohammed. Last one. Please tell me about code snippets for writing controller actions for get and post. Are there any action snippets in ASP.NET 5?
No, we have scaffolding. So we have a first round of scaffolding was added in RC1, so you can scaffold out sort of very minimal CRUD controllers and DB contexts, just like you could previously, and we will be updating that with a bit more stuff for RTM. But I'm not aware of snippets. But Mads and Syed are the people to talk to. Mads is really big on snippets, and if there is a good list of snippets that people think should be there, we could find a way to get those available, whether by an extension or something else.
All right. There's a few people still left, and I am going to go to the doctor.
All right, man.
Goodbye.
Be well.
Show us a dramatic zoom out, and then I will pass out.
I'm zooming. I'm zoomed.